lines. I want to draw on your deep experience in and with China as head of the IMF's China division, right? It seems to me when you take a step back, you know, beyond the huge cuts, it seems like a huge cut, right, going from 145 to 30, yes. But in terms of strategy, right, what has the Trump administration actually achieved on two pretty clear and obvious goals that they've been hammering on for years now, right? One is to redress the trade imbalance with China. Two is to try and get China to change its entire economic model to be less dependent on investment, on exports, and more on consumption. Have either of those, have we moved the needle on either of those objectives?
In an indirect way, Martin, I think the answer to some of that might actually be at least partially yes, because China is now recognizing that its reliance on exports is going to leave it very, very exposed. Right now, one of the crucial things to keep in mind is that the U.S. is negotiating trade deals with a great deal number of other countries, and China at the same time has been trying to get other countries onto its side. Now, what is even more interesting is what happened with the US-UK deal that is in the works. One of the key elements in that deal is an agreement by Britain to reduce its dependence on supply chains running through China, and also ensuring that parts of its technological infrastructure is no longer vulnerable in any way to exposure to Chinese production. So it seems like the U.S. is trying to corner China at some level, while China was in fact trying to get other countries onto its side. So given that China is building up a huge amount of excess capacity in its industries, which it knows it needs to export, I think they're going to much more forcefully shift towards internal rebalancing so that they drive up consumption. On other issues like technology transfers and so on, I think it's going to be a lot harder because China would like to become more self-sufficient in terms of technology, and this is certainly going to push them in that direction, but they're not quite there yet. So in a curious way, that might be happening. Now, one might also argue that by increasing the odds of a recession, Trump is causing the U.S. trade deficit to decline. Of course, it's not a great way to deal with the trade deficit. Ultimately, you need to deal with policies that affect savings and investment. So perhaps in a very backhanded way, some of these objectives are in fact being furthered, but it's not the best way to get to them.
Yeah, it is not right. It's kind of ironic as well. Listen, Eswar, I'm really keen to talk to you about this whole idea of rebalancing China's economic model more towards the consumption. We'll get to that in just a bit. But this whole idea of trade diversion and rerouting, if you were a China bull, let's say, right, you'd say, look, Trump won. He slapped tariffs on steel, aluminum. Look, China found a workaround, right? And it certainly did, right? It's like, okay, you're going to do this to us, I'll just sell to somebody else. And they did that. And they shifted their supply chains as well. This time around, though, I'm wondering, is it as easy? Because it's not just steel and aluminum anymore. It's basically everything, right? And this whole worry about, especially Southeast Asia, maybe the EU as well, looking at this potential flood of Chinese exports coming their way. The flip side of that is, much as China may want to or think it can sell to the EU or to a lot of Southeast Asian countries, none of them together, I think, are able to sort of make up for the demand that the U.S. presents and their buying power. Would you agree with that? And also the other thing is they may not have the kind of buying power or spending power that the U.S. has.
Domestic demand in the U.S. is probably stronger than in most other major economies, and the U.S. consumer remains very important for the world economy, including for China. So as you correctly pointed out, China's direct exports to the U.S. have fallen quite significantly over the last few years. Exports routed through other countries such as Mexico and Vietnam have increased, but Trump is shutting off that channel. He's also shutting off the channel of de minimis exports that get around the low threshold on exports that can escape the tariffs. So all of those channels are being shut off for China to evade U.S. tariffs. And in China right now, the real concern is that given that the economy is facing deflation, they need to find a way to deal with the excess capacity that is causing that deflation. And the rest of the world is terrified about having China's exports landing up on their shores. So I think one of the reasons why China may have been very eager to come to the table is because what happens between the US and China may not have stayed between the two of them. It could have led to trade barriers going up against Chinese exports around the world, which would have been a very difficult outcome for China to deal with.